In today's video, I want to talk to you about doing some improv quilting with curves. Hi, I'm Kim Jamieson-Hirst of Chatterbox Quilts, and today I'm taking a look at this book. It's by Grisdela, and it's called Freehand Curve Quilts, Improv Techniques for Creative Play and Bold Expression. And it's from C&T Publishing, so thank you so much to C&T Publishing for allowing me to share this book with you. Now, if you don't know Cindy Grisdela already, she is an improv quilter, what I would say a modern quilter, and her quilts are amazing. And in this particular one, she's focusing on curves, which can be a real bugbear for a lot of quilters I know. The nice thing in this is we're doing freehand curves and it's improv, so a little easier in some ways and maybe a little more challenging in others. But I know that Cindy is going to have lots of great information in this book so that you'll be able to be successful if you're trying some of the projects or the exercises really is what she has in this book. So let's take a closer look. So as she says at the beginning, where to start, no templates, no patterns, and no rules. That's my improv process of creating with freehand cut curves. But, you know, for some people it can be a little challenging. So she starts off talking about the different kinds of fabric that she uses, and typically she uses solid fabrics. She has been getting more into prints, but she is going to talk about the use of fabrics and how she combines these into these improv quilts that have curves in them, right? She talks about color and value and how she starts. So she usually starts by choosing a certain number of fat quarters and colors that she likes. And she also starts with a mood or an energy she wants to create. You know, warm colors like red, orange, and yellow communicate energy and light. And, excuse me, cool colors like green, blue, and purple are usually calmer and more serene. So she's starting off with a certain number of fabrics and we'll work those into her projects. She's going to start winnowing them down a bit because we don't always work with that many fabrics, of course, in our projects. So as we get into the book, one of the things that she uses as a tool is a camera, and this can be really helpful, of course, especially if you are trying to get sufficient contrast between your fabrics. Taking pictures in grayscale or monotone, black and white, can be really helpful to identify fabrics, I should say, that may not be working and to make sure that the fabrics you've chosen do work in your project. Now, of course, when we're talking about these curves, you're going to be talking about how to cut them, right? So we get into these techniques she's using to cut these curves and to sew them together. So she shows you how to sew them together to make sure that it's not going to be super challenging for you, right? And then she gets into talking about different parts of these curved really blocks that she's going to create eventually, right? So you might have skinny lines in here. So she's showing you how to make those, how wide would you usually cut them, how to do that. She has different names for them. So she has like belly curves where you can see this big curve coming out at you sort of thing, rather than some of the ones that might be a little thinner, and how to cut those. She also shows you different kinds of insets that you have, like what she calls these wonky triangle curves, where she's inserting these little triangles inside a curve. So you're kind of starting with, you know, what we consider just a simple curved piece of fabric, and then we are adding more and more and more to it. So she explains how to do that. Lots of great photos in this book so you can see nice and clear what she is doing, right? Then, of course, once you're making these blocks, well, you've got to put them together. So how do you do that? So she has puzzling blocks together as another chapter. So she says after you've completed a collection of blocks using the techniques in the last chapter, it's time to figure out how to put them together, right? So she has information on how to do that. The book is chock full of information, actually. And of course, as you make these blocks, because they're improv, they're not necessarily going to come out to the same size, or you might intentionally want some that are bigger, some that are smaller to give interest to your quilt. So she talks about adding these coping elements to make sure they're all going to fit together, and different ideas for that too. You can have these little checkerboard squares if you want. You can add just like a solid strip of fabric. So again, lots of different ways of doing that. She has what she calls these log cabin pops. You can see these little ones in the center and how to make them as well. Then, of course, when you're stitching all these blocks together, one of the nice things when they're improv is that the seams don't need to match. We love to hear that, right, as quilters. So she has different ways of doing that. So you can see and hear how these are not matching up. This is just highlighted to show you where the seams are. There, she's put together different chunks, you know, that are coming together, and you can see these seams, how they're not having to match with anything else, which is quite freeing, I think. She also talks about partial seams. This is something we don't often talk about when we're talking about putting quilts together or even within a block. Partial seams aren't that difficult to do, and they can be really effective in a quilt. So she explains how to do that. Again, you've got all these photos to show you how to do that. And the interesting thing when it's an improv and there is no pattern is how to know when it's finished. So she has information here about thinking that you can do to see whether you think that this is finished or not, or do you still need to keep going a little bit more, all right? So that's always something interesting to consider. And again, it's not something we need to think about when we are following a pattern, but certainly when it's improv, when does it end, right? When is it done, okay? And then the back part of the book, she has what she calls guided exercises. So because this is improv, you're not going to have projects per se, but she's going to guide you through the ways that she has already explained to do these improv curves, and she's going to be letting you try them out a little bit, getting from the easy ones to a little bit harder, if you will, so that you can be successful in working with these improv curves. So she starts out with using some leftovers from a previous project, something fairly simple to put together, and as I said, we're going to get a little bit more complex as we move along, and different ideas for how to do this. Another way to use these is by starting off with like a medallion, okay? So you're starting off with some in the center, then you're adding different rounds to it as you do with the medallion quilt, and you keep building out. So that works well with improv quilts as well. Now, of course, you have to quilt this when it's done, and I love how she always has ideas for quilting in her books. She talks about whether you want to do this with a walking foot, and if so, different suggestions, or maybe you're going to go into free motion quilting, and again, we have lots of different ideas. The quilting motifs she uses here aren't super difficult, I will say, which is a good thing. Okay, don't get me wrong. It's not like that's a bad thing. It's a good thing, right? Because it's easier and it'll be quicker for you to quilt a project if you're able to use designs that you may already know, right? That you can keep it fairly simple and still be very effective in these quilts. And of course, because she's using solid fabric, you will see the quilting more, but it's really to add texture to the design that you've created with the improv stitching you've done already. Now, at the back, she talks about finishing techniques, because these are different. These are modern kind of quilts, right? So you may not just be putting a binding on it. You might want to do something different with them. And because it's improv, how big is it? Maybe it's not all that large. What are you going to do with it? So facing is nice to put on these quilts, and she explains how to do that. She also talks about mounting on canvas. So again, if you're just making a small improv piece, it might be really cool to have several of them. You might make several of them and put them on the wall like artwork, right? She talks about pieced backings, how to make those as well. And then at the very back of the book, we have a student gallery. So it's always nice to see how other people are using these techniques and what are they doing with these blocks, what kind of a quilt have they made. So I really appreciate being able to see what other people are doing, not only for the different blocks they've created and the quilts they've created, but also what color combinations, what fabric combinations are they putting together. That's always interesting too. And you can see between these two here, there's quite the difference with the black, white, and gray going on here. And then these kind of, I don't know what you call these colors. They're not exactly pastel, but they're not super bright and shocking. But the yellow, greens, blues that are coming together is kind of a soothing quilt. So again, seeing those at the back is really helpful. It might give you ideas for fabric combinations, if nothing else, right? So if you're wanting to do some freehand curve improv piecing, you want to learn how to do that, I would highly recommend you take a look at Freehand Curve Quilts by Cindy Grisdela. You can find out where to get a copy. I've got a link up above or in the description below. Now, Cindy has also written other books, and if you're wondering what those are like, don't worry, I've got you covered. Check out this video that has all the information that you need. And for more helpful quilting information, be sure to check out my website at www.chatterboxquilts.com.